Marcus Red Bell and Darius Ice Carter ruled Chicago's west side with fear and blood, but when a silent assassin known only as Shade entered the streets, loyalties shattered, betrayals ran deep, and the deadly feud threatened to consume everyone in its path. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. The west side of Chicago had always been a place where shadows moved faster than the law. Abandoned warehouses, graffiti-streaked alleys, and flickering streetlights marked the territory where only the bold dared to walk. Marcus Red Bell had grown up in these streets, watching his father struggle and his friends vanish into the dark corners of crime. From a young age, he learned that respect was earned with fear, and power was the only language people understood. By the time he was in his early 20s, Red had built a small crew, men who were loyal but hungry for more, just like him. They ran minor operations at first: street gambling, small-scale drug deals, and protection rackets. But Red was not satisfied. He wanted control, dominance, and a name that would echo across the west side. He studied every rival, memorized every corner of the neighborhood, and calculated his moves with the precision of a chess player. Red was known for his signature red jacket, a symbol of the blood he was willing to spill and the warning he sent to anyone who dared oppose him. His presence alone was enough to silence whispers in the streets. People learned to avoid him, and those who didn't soon regretted it. The first signs of Red's rise came quietly. He intercepted shipments meant for other crews, offering protection to struggling dealers in exchange for loyalty. Some accepted, seeing opportunity in aligning with a rising force. Others resisted, underestimating the patience and cunning that Red possessed. Slowly, block by block, he extended his influence. He had a vision for the west side, a plan to consolidate the fragmented gangs into a network under his command. Every decision was calculated: whom to recruit, whom to intimidate, and whom to eliminate. Red knew that power came not just from strength, but from fear and strategy. Nights were the time when Red shone brightest. Under the dim glow of streetlights, he would walk the streets, observing, calculating, and sending subtle warnings to rivals. A single car left abandoned, a broken window, a graffiti mark. It was all part of a silent message that he was watching, and no one was untouchable. His reputation grew not from random acts of violence, but from carefully orchestrated displays of authority. People began to speak in hushed tones of Red's audacity. Even seasoned criminals felt a chill when his name came up. But Red was not reckless. Each move, each expansion, was a step in a larger plan. He knew that impatience could destroy him as easily as an enemy's bullet. Yet beneath his calculated exterior, there was ambition burning like fire. The streets were his canvas, and he intended to paint his legacy in blood and fear. By the end of the year, whispers of Red's growing empire reached beyond the West. Dealers, gang members, and even local police officers had begun to take notice. The quiet man with a red jacket was no longer just another kid from the block. He was a force to be reckoned with. And the city, unknowingly, was about to become the stage for a bloody feud that would define Chicago's west side for years to come. Across the west side, the streets whispered of a new power rising. But Red was not the only one with ambitions. Darius Ice Carter controlled the northwest blocks, and his reputation was one of cold calculation. Unlike Red, Ice relied on strategy over brute force. He observed, he waited, and he struck with precision. His crew was smaller but disciplined, each member chosen for loyalty and skill rather than fear. Ice had built his empire quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention and maintaining control through intimidation and meticulous planning. The first spark between Red and Ice came from a seemingly small incident: a missing shipment, drugs that neither side wanted to admit losing. Rumors spread through the streets like wildfire, each whisper adding fuel to the growing tension. Neither Red nor Ice wanted open confrontation, but suspicion was enough to ignite a silent war. At night, the streets became battlegrounds without witnesses. Cars would be vandalized, delivery men intercepted, and cryptic threats left for the opposing crew. The air was thick with paranoia, as each gang wondered if they could trust even their closest allies. Ice watched Red's moves carefully, noting patterns, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. He sent his men to shadow Red's operations, gathering intelligence without being noticed. Red in turn noticed subtle signs of intrusion, missed deliveries, altered routes, and people quietly disappearing. The tension grew, and the first real clash was inevitable. It happened on a rainy night when Red's crew attempted to take over a corner that Ice considered his own. A brief skirmish erupted in the shadows of the alleyways. Gunfire echoed, cars screeched away, and both sides retreated before anyone could die. The clash was minor, but it sent a message. The streets were no longer safe, and the feud had officially begun. Innocent residents felt the first tremors of chaos. Windows rattled as shots rang out, families locked their doors, and rumors of gang activity spread like wildfire. Red knew Ice was not a reckless opponent. Every move had a purpose, every silence carried a threat. He realized that brute force alone would not win this war. Meanwhile, Ice's crew became more aggressive, testing Red's patience with small ambushes and provocations. The tension escalated, block by block, until both sides were locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The streets of Chicago became a chessboard, each corner a potential trap, every shadow a threat. People began to fear nightfall, unsure if they would witness a drive-by shooting or stumble upon a violent altercation. And through it all, Red and Ice studied each other silently, knowing that one mistake could mean death. The feud that started with a missing shipment had grown into a dangerous rivalry that threatened to consume not just the gangs, but the entire neighborhood. Chicago's West Side was no longer just a collection of streets, it had become a battlefield, and both leaders understood that the coming weeks could decide who would survive and who would fall. The city, unaware of the storm brewing in its alleys, would soon pay the price for the ambitions of two men who refused to back down. Red's crew was growing, but with growth came cracks. Loyalty, once unshakable, became fragile when ambition and fear collided. Jamal "Knuckles" Hayes, a trusted lieutenant, began to feel restless. He had joined Red's crew out of admiration, but the allure of power and safety offered by Ice was too tempting to ignore. Knuckles started secretly meeting with Ice's men, feeding them information about Red's operations, locations, and plans. At first, it was small details, delivery times, names of new recruits. But gradually, it escalated to precise intelligence about Red's movements. Red, focused on expanding his empire, trusted Knuckles completely. He had no reason to suspect betrayal among his closest allies, but the streets have a way of exposing the vulnerable, and trust in this world is the deadliest gamble. The first major operation Red planned was meant to solidify his dominance. A large-scale robbery targeting one of Ice's supply warehouses. The plan was meticulous. Every member knew their role, every escape route was mapped, and every precaution was taken. Red believed this would send a message that he was untouchable, but Knuckles had other ideas. The information he provided to Ice allowed the rival gang to prepare in secret. On the night of the operation, Red's crew arrived, confident and armed, only to walk into a trap. Bullets tore through the shadows as Ice's men emerged from hidden positions. Chaos erupted instantly. Smoke, screams, and the smell of gunpowder filled the alleyway. Red's lieutenant, a man he had trusted for years, was shot in the crossfire, and died before anyone could reach him. Red barely escaped, diving into the darkness and disappearing into the night. The streets seemed to close in around him, every shadow a potential enemy. Rage and betrayal burned in his chest. But there was no time to grieve. Red realized that the real threat was no longer just Ice. It was someone inside his own crew. Knuckles had undermined him at every turn, proving that loyalty was a fragile illusion. As Red retreated to his hideout, he examined every member of his crew, every plan, every mistake. He understood that his empire could crumble from within faster than it could be challenged from outside. Meanwhile, Ice celebrated his victory quietly, knowing that eliminating a portion of Red's forces without direct confrontation had shifted the balance of power. Red's reputation had taken a hit, and whispers of vulnerability spread quickly. The West Side, already tense, became a breeding ground for fear and speculation. Red, however, was far from defeated. Betrayal had ignited something inside him, a relentless drive to reclaim his dominance and punish those who had crossed him. But he had to be smart, more careful than ever, because one wrong move could be fatal. In the shadows of the West Side, Red began plotting, knowing that revenge and survival were inseparable. The war was no longer just a struggle for territory, it was a battle of wits, loyalty, and power, with betrayal lurking behind every corner, ready to strike when least expected. Red knew that surviving the war with ice required more than brute force. He needed allies. The West Side was no longer a place for lone dominance, and desperation pushed him to make a risky choice. He reached out to a smaller, violent crew from the South Side, men who had long been rivals to both Red and Ice but shared a hunger for chaos and profit. They agreed to a artery alliance, drawn by Red's reputation and the promise of shared gain. Together, they began planning an audacious attack on one of Ice's key warehouses, a move meant to reclaim lost power and send a clear warning. Every detail was calculated, the timing of the strike, the placement of lookouts, and the weapons they would carry. Red's crew trained relentlessly, rehearsing the operation in abandoned lots, testing escape routes, and refining strategies until every movement was precise. On the night of the attack, the streets were quiet, the usual hum of the city replaced by an ominous silence. Red and his allies approached the warehouse, moving through shadows with methodical precision. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Explosions shattered the night, smoke rose into the sky, and gunfire tore through the empty streets. The attack was brutal, leaving no room for mercy. Red's men fought with a ferocity born of desperation, determined to reclaim the upper hand. The warehouse, a symbol of Ice's power, was left in ruins, its walls scarred by bullets and fire. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Red had achieved victory, but triumph came at a heavy cost. Several of Red's most loyal soldiers were captured during the assault, and others went missing in the chaos. The South Side crew, though effective, proved unpredictable, their loyalty tied to opportunity rather than honor. Red realized that even in victory, weakness lingered at the edges of his empire. The streets, already tense, began to take notice. Residents whispered about the explosion and gunfire, fearful of stepping outside their door. The police, previously indifferent to minor gang activity, began to investigate in earnest, adding pressure to an already volatile situation. Red moved quickly, trying to secure his remaining forces and protect those who had survived. He understood that the alliance with the South Side crew, while effective in the short term, was fragile. Any misstep could lead to betrayal or disaster. Ice, now aware of the attack, became more aggressive, reinforcing his territories and sending his own messages of warning. The feud had escalated beyond simple rivalry. It had become a full-scale war, with both sides willing to risk everything for control of the streets. In the aftermath, Red reflected on the cost of ambition. Power was intoxicating, but the stakes were deadly. Every ally could turn into an enemy, every shadow could hide a threat, and every decision carried the weight of life or death. The West Side had become a battlefield, and Red understood that the coming weeks would demand not just strength and strategy, but cunning, resilience, and the ability to survive betrayals that could come from anywhere. As the night faded, and the city returned to uneasy quiet, Red plotted his next moves, determined to ensure that the streets he called home would bow to him once more. Just when the war between Red and Ice seemed unstoppable, a new presence emerged on the streets of Chicago, one that neither gang had anticipated. Known only as Shade, this mysterious figure operated in the shadows, unseen and unheard, yet leaving a trail of fear in his wake. Shade did not belong to any crew, and no one knew his motives. He struck with precision, targeting key members from both Red's and Ice's operations. His attacks were swift and calculated, a car rigged to explode, a lone gang member found in an alley with no witnesses, a supply stash mysteriously burned to the ground. The gangs initially assumed they were being sabotaged by each other, but the methods were unfamiliar, too precise, almost surgical. Red noticed the pattern first. Entire operations that he had meticulously planned began to fail without explanation. Supplies disappeared, men went missing, and rival ambushes failed to show up, leaving him puzzled. He started suspecting traitors in his own crew again, but the losses didn't fit the usual signs of betrayal. Ice, on the other hand, had seen the same effect. His normally confident and calculated strategy began to crumble as members were eliminated quietly, leaving no evidence, no witnesses, nothing but fear. The two gangs, each believing the other had grown bolder and more ruthless, increased the intensity of their own attacks, unknowingly feeding Shade's hidden campaign. The West Side became a place of uncertainty. Streets that were once familiar now felt alien and dangerous. Even the most hardened gang members hesitated to step outside, aware that death could strike without warning. Every alley, every warehouse, every corner was a potential trap. Red, desperate to regain control, attempted to track Shade, setting decoys and traps of his own. But Shade was always one step ahead, striking when Red least expected and vanishing without a trace. Ice tried to retaliate, sending teams to intercept the shadowy figure, but each attempt ended in failure. Shade left no clues, no fingerprints, no pattern that could be deciphered. Rumors of Shade spread quickly, whispered in the streets like an urban legend. Some said he was a former gang member, wronged by both sides. Others claimed he was a hitman from outside Chicago, trained to eliminate chaos without being noticed. The truth remained elusive, and both gangs grew increasingly paranoid. Every ally was questioned, every plan double-checked, and every move shadowed. Red realized that the war he thought he controlled was now unpredictable. The presence of Shade had shifted the balance, introducing an invisible enemy that neither loyalty nor fear could control. For the first time, Red understood that survival required more than aggression. It demanded caution, observation, and respect for the unknown. The West Side, already scarred by violence and betrayal, became a maze of suspicion and dread. Red and Ice continued their feud, unaware that a third force was silently shaping their fate. Shade operated in the shadows, unbound, unpredictable, and unstoppable, turning the streets into a place where no one was safe and no one could be trusted. The streets of Chicago's West Side had become a battlefield, where every step carried danger and every shadow could conceal death. What had begun as a feud between Red and Ice had escalated beyond control. The presence of Shade, the silent assassin, made the violence unpredictable, and the gang's retaliation only fueled the chaos. Drive-by shootings became common, cars riddled with bullets abandoned in alleys, and even routine nights felt like a gauntlet. Innocent residents, once used to the neighborhood's gritty tension, found themselves trapped in a war they had no part in. Windows were boarded up, children no longer played in streets, and families whispered warnings of coming violence. Red moved with caution, his paranoia growing daily. He could no longer trust anyone completely, not even his closest allies. Every plan was double-checked, every movement masked, yet the losses continued. Supplies were intercepted, ambushes failed, and men disappeared without explanation. Ice faced the same uncertainty. His usually disciplined crew grew restless under the invisible pressure. He tried to maintain control with intimidation, but the unseen hand of Shade kept undermining his operations. Small victories were fleeting, and each loss emboldened the other side, making every confrontation more deadly. The feud spilled into public spaces, leaving the city itself a victim. A gas station was set ablaze during a miscalculated strike, sending flames and smoke into the night. Cars were stolen, stores looted, and gunfire echoed from block to block. Residents learned to stay indoors, doors locked and lights off, praying not to be caught in the crossfire. Even the police found it nearly impossible to maintain order. Their presence sometimes escalated confrontations rather than containing them. Red and Ice both understood that the war had moved beyond their control. The streets themselves had taken on a life of chaos. Each gang became desperate, launching increasingly reckless attacks in an attempt to dominate. Loyalties shifted as men questioned who would survive the next strike. Some deserted, fearing death, while others sought revenge for fallen friends, fueling an endless cycle of violence. Amid the destruction, Shade continued to strike silently. His attacks were surgical, targeting leaders and key operatives, leaving the gangs scrambling to adjust. Both Red and Ice realized that no matter how much firepower they wielded, the real danger was unseen. Every day became a gamble, where survival depended on luck, caution, and reading the signs of hidden threats. The neighborhood had changed forever. Streets that once buzzed with life now echoed with the sounds of gunfire and sirens. Fear had replaced normalcy, and power was measured in who could survive the night. The feud, once a contest for dominance, had turned into a nightmare of unpredictability. Chicago's West Side had become a stage for destruction, where the balance of power could shift with a single shot, and death waited patiently in the shadows. Red and Ice were no longer just leaders, they were pawns in a war dictated by chaos, betrayal, and the silent hand of a killer who could strike without warning. Red knew the war could not continue endlessly. Ice had grown bolder, more reckless, and Shade's silent attacks had weakened both sides. Red decided it was time for one final strike, a plan so precise and daring that it could either end the feud or destroy everything he had built. He spent weeks preparing, mapping escape routes, studying Ice's patterns, and ensuring every member of his crew understood their role. The operation was designed to catch Ice completely off guard, a decisive blow to eliminate him permanently and reclaim dominance over the West Side. On the night of the attack, the city seemed unusually quiet. The streets were empty, save for a few shadows moving cautiously in the dim light. Red and his crew approached Ice's main hideout, armed and ready. Every step was calculated, every sound analyzed. But even the best plans can be undone by betrayal, and Red had failed to account for the one person he had trusted most. Knuckles, still secretly aiding Ice, had fed information about Red's operation to his rival. Ice, aware of the trap, prepared a counter-ambush without leaving any trace. The moment Red's crew moved in, chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the night, echoing through the streets like thunder. Red's men fought fiercely, but the ambush was perfect. Ice's crew knew exactly where to strike and where to hold back. Red moved with speed and precision, trying to salvage the operation, but his efforts were warned at every turn. The streets became a maze of smoke, fire and gunfire. Buildings shook from explosions, cars were riddled with bullets, and cries of pain echoed in the darkness. Red realized the depth of Knuckles' betrayal, the sting of someone he had trusted undermining him at the critical moment. In the chaos, Red was cornered. Police, tipped off by neighbors who had heard the gunfire, arrived quickly, further complicating the battle. Red's escape was narrow. He ran through back alleys, dodging bullets and debris, but ultimately he was captured during a raid. Ice, though wounded, managed to slip away into the shadows, furious yet alive. The streets, once a battleground for Red's ambition, fell silent in the aftermath. Many of Red's closest allies were dead or imprisoned, and the South Side crew had vanished, leaving only the ruins of a war that had consumed the West Side. Shade, the silent assassin, disappeared as mysteriously as he had appeared, leaving a trail of uncertainty and fear. The city slowly began to recover, but the scars of the feud remained. The streets, buildings, and neighborhoods bore the memory of violence, betrayal, and ambition. Red's empire was broken, Ice's power diminished, and Shade's legend only grew. The war that had seemed unstoppable finally ended, but its echoes would resonate for years to come. Chicago's West Side had been forever changed, a place where survival, loyalty, and power collided in a deadly dance, and where the line between victory and ruin was razor-thin. The city had witnessed the fall of titans, the betrayal of trusted allies, and the presence of a shadow no one could catch, leaving a story of fear and blood that would haunt the streets long after the guns had fallen silent. The dust finally began to settle over Chicago's West Side, but the scars of the feud were far from gone. Red was behind bars, stripped of the empire he had fought so hard to build, and Ice had disappeared into the shadows, a wounded predator biding his time. The streets, once alive with violence, were eerily quiet, though the memory of chaos lingered in every corner. Residents whispered about the nights of gunfire, explosions, and betrayal, their stories carrying the weight of fear that had consumed the neighborhood. Knuckles had vanished, leaving his betrayal a haunting mystery, and Shade, the silent assassin, remained unseen, an enigma whose strikes had changed the course of the feud. Some said Shade had left the city, while others believed he still moved among the alleys, waiting for the next spark of violence to strike. Life returned slowly, but the West Side was forever altered. Shops reopened, Children cautiously returned to the streets, and the hum of the city resumed. Yet an invisible tension remained. People looked over their shoulders, remembering the power of two men whose ambitions had torn the neighborhood apart. The police, having intervened during the climactic raid, tried to maintain control, but they knew the balance of power in the West Side was fragile. Gangs that had survived the war were scattered, wary of one another and fearful of retribution. Red, from his cell, plotted quietly, refusing to accept his defeat as final. He studied news reports, monitored the streets through whispers from loyal allies, and planned for a future return. Ice, on the other hand, disappeared completely from public view, becoming a ghost in the city's underworld. The legend of Shade, however, grew stronger. His precise, invisible strikes had reminded both gangs that control could slip away in an instant, and that death could come from nowhere. Fear of Shade became a tool, a weapon more powerful than guns or alliances, and stories of the silent assassin were told as warnings to anyone who dared rise too high. The West Side began to rebuild, but the past hung over it like a shadow. Abandoned buildings bore bullet holes, burned-out cars were left in alleys as grim reminders, and walls still displayed the graffiti of messages left during the war. Survivors of the feud carried the weight of loss and betrayal, and the streets themselves seemed to hold a collective memory of the bloodshed. Though the war had ended, its consequences shaped the next generation, teaching lessons about loyalty, ambition, and the cost of power. The legend of Red, Ice, and Shade became part of the city's dark folklore, a story passed in whispers to warn newcomers of the dangers of ambition unchecked. Chicago's West Side had survived, but it would never forget. The feud had claimed lives, destroyed alliances, and left fear embedded in the very foundations of the neighborhood. And somewhere, in the corners of the city, Shade's presence remained, a reminder that some wars never truly end, and some killers never leave the shadow. The streets, quiet for now, waited, knowing that power, betrayal, and revenge always lingered just beneath the surface, ready to ignite again.